video, we're going to look at how to find derivatives numerically and graphically. So numerically means instead of being given an equation, you're going to be given a table of values. So you're going to be given the numerical values of f and g and f prime and g prime instead of an equation. And then of course graphically means you're going to be given a graph instead of an equation. These questions take a lot of the algebra out of finding derivatives. So it's a good way to test that you know your derivative rules, but maybe not, make an algebraic mistake along the way, which is typically what happens. So when you're given a table of values, we don't know what the equations are, but in the table we're given, values for x. So like in this table, x is equal to 0 and 1. And then we're given values for f of x, g of x, f prime of x, and g prime of x. Okay, so usually the questions will look something like this. Use the chart to find h prime of 0 if h of x is equal to f of x plus g of x. Okay, so this is what we're finding the derivative of. Because remember, h prime means derivative. And then h prime of 0 means we're going to find the derivative, but then substitute x with 0. So let's just start with h prime. So if you remember, this was one of our properties for derivatives. If you are finding the derivative of a sum of two functions, you can just find the derivative of each function separately and add it together. So h prime would just equal f prime plus g prime. Okay, and then to find h prime of 0, we're just going to replace x with 0. And then we're just going to find these values in the table. So f prime of 0 is going to equal 5. So this will end up equaling 5 plus, and then g prime of 0 is 1/3. So to add 5 plus 1/3, I'm just going to make it 5 and 1/3. I think that's the easier thing to do. Okay, let's look at number 2. We want to use the chart to find h prime of 1 if h of x is equal to f of x times g of x. So to find h prime, we have to use product rule. So h prime would equal f times g prime plus g times f prime. That's straight product rule. First times derivative of the second plus second times derivative of the first. And then we're going to substitute 1 in place of x. So we'll get f of 1 times g prime of 1 plus g of 1 times f prime of 1. Okay, and then we're just going to pull these values from the table. So f of 1 is going to equal 3. Okay, times g prime of 1, which is -8/3. Okay, plus g of 1 is -4 times f prime of 1, which is -1/3. Okay, so let's start by multiplying straight across. So we'll get -24 over 3 plus 4 over 3, and then we'll just add our numerator, and we'll get -20 over 3. And that would be our final answer. That would equal h prime of 1. Okay, now let's look at an example where we have to use chain rule. Okay, so we're given a new table this time. But again, we want to use the chart or the table to find h prime of 4 if h of x equals f of g of x. So hopefully you recognize this as chain rule. So h prime of x would equal f prime of g of x g prime of x. Okay, and then to find h prime of 4, we're just going to replace x with 4 in our table. Okay, and then we're going to go to our table to pull these values. Now, you actually want to start here because to find f prime of g of 4, you got to start with g of 4. So I'm going to go to my table. G of 4 is equal to 2. So this will become f prime of 2 times g prime of 4. Okay, and now f prime of 2 is equal to 8. Okay, times g prime of 4, which is equal to 1/2. And then 8 times 1/2 is equal to 4. So h prime of 4 is equal to 4. So these are kind of fun, and they're a good way to study your rules because you're basically having to write them down over and over.
Please send. Oh, okay. Yep.
Okay, now let's look at an example where instead of giving a table, you're given a graph. So this goes back to the meaning of the derivative being slope. Okay, and so if you notice on graphs, although they are piecewise functions, the pieces are linear. So that makes finding slope easier. Okay, because remember the derivative is technically slope at a single point, but if the function is a linear, then it has a constant slope. So we'll be able to find the slope from the graph pretty easily just using rise and run. Okay. All right, so in this problem, we are told we're given the graph of f and the graph of g, and we're told h of x equals f of x divided by g of x, and we want to find h prime of 2. So the first thing we're going to have to do is find h prime of x, which is just going to be quotient rule. So it's low d high minus high d low all over low squared. Okay, and then to find h prime of 2, we're just going to replace x with 2. So this will become g of 2 times f prime of 2 minus f of 2 times g prime of 2 all over g of 2 squared. Okay, so now we're just going to pull these values from the graphs that were provided. Okay, so if we're finding g of 2, you're just looking at the graph of g, and we're just evaluating the function. So that just means when x is 2, what is your y value? Well, when x is 2, and I go up to my graph, and over to the y-axis, y is 4. So g of 2 equals 4. Okay, then we're going to find f prime of 2, but remember f prime means slope. So I'm going to go over here to the graph of f, but I want to find the slope when x equals 2. Okay, so here's where x equals 2, which means I'm finding the slope of this line. Okay, so I'm just going to figure out rise over run. So I have to go up 6 and over 3. So that means my slope would be 2, 6 divided by 3. So f prime of 2 is equal to 2. Okay, minus f of 2. Now f of 2 is different. F of 2 just means we're evaluating the function. So when x is 2, y is 4. Okay, then we have to find g prime of 2. So I'm going to go back over to the graph of g, and again, I got to find slope. Okay, so here's 2, which means I'm finding the slope of this line segment. And so rise over run, you go up 2, right 2, so my slope would be 1. So g prime of 2 is equal to 1. Okay, all over g of 2 squared. Now we already found g of 2 equals 4. So this would be all over 4 squared. And then we're just going to work it out. So 4 times 2 is 8, minus 4 over 16. That ends up being 4 over 16, which equals 1/4 in the end. So h prime of 2 is going we're doing with the table of values, we're just now having to figure out these values from the graphs, okay? But if you're finding the derivative, then you want to find slope from your graph. And if you're not finding the derivative, like just g of 2 or f of 2, then you're just using the graph to evaluate the function. So given x, you're finding y. All right, so we're going to practice these some more in class tomorrow, but I think, you'll actually kind of like them. They're kind of fun because they do take, a lot of that tedious algebra out of solving the problems. So as always, thank you for watching and have a good night.